So when I first started high school, I had little to no friends at all, and I didn't particularly mind it. But I do have a tendency to talk a lot, so I liked talking to other people. I made a friend around the first couple of weeks that we will call Z, and he was pretty nice. I didn't really have any issues with him other than the occasional normal down mood most high school students have. But moving on, he had a friend, Jay, that I got along with when I would sit and talk with both of them. Jay wasn't really open about his old neckbeardedness up front. The basics I knew about him was that he liked anime, hated furries, and liked Z at least a little bit. As the time in high school progressed, Z moved on to his preferred group of friends, and I moved on with mine. We still talked to each other occasionally, but I mainly hung around Jay and his friends, like any normal group of friends in high school. We would make jokes and call each other names, but we knew it was playful, and no one really meant it. It got progressively weirder when Jay would make sexual jokes about me around the time I came out as transgender non-binary. I stupidly dismissed this behavior because I didn't want to cause an argument, as I was very much unable to handle arguing in high school. Jay was very into video games, anime, dark humor, and the normal things neckbeards are usually interested in, but he was pretty competitive when it came to liking these things. He found very ableist and anti-autistic humor his favorite, which confused me, but I pretended to enjoy it for the sake of the friendship. He would often complain about lefties, SJWs, and generally anyone who would stand up for general human rights. He often made very racist jokes, mainly towards black people, and used the excuse that he was black, quote unquote, so it was okay. He also tried to act really tough and stand up for me when me and my other friends would joke around, which made me very uncomfortable. I should have taken the too far jokes as a hint that I shouldn't be hanging around him, but I was very clingy once I got friends that I could enjoy being around. Which is where it all went downhill. Jay found months into our friendship that I was pretty clingy, and he decided to take advantage of it by asking me out, to which I also stupidly said yes to. I do struggle with mental health issues, and this did cause me to mistake platonic affection with romantic attraction to him, which he had apparently taken into account. Now, I'm not into shaming people for their appearances. Example, the typical neckbeard appearance people describe, and Jay was not actually bad looking, but he did definitely lack in personal hygiene and facial hair grooming for someone who was 16, though he often used his autism as an excuse for this, and I just never really cared enough to question it. So when Jay and I began our relationship, I was really attached to him as I had really bad attachment problems when I was younger. I followed him everywhere in between classes, would end up very close to him at lunch, and cling on to him. I even ignored his sexual comments after me coming out as asexual as well, brushing them off as just jokes and nothing more. This was around the time he was starting to show me his actual personality. I would sometimes have him over at my house to hang out, and he would constantly joke about how women belong in the kitchen, that trans people were cancer, and that I was the only exception, about how pedophiles were over-stigmatized, and he would often try to talk to me about the types of hentai and video game porn he liked with me. Again, knowing I was asexual and sex repulsed in my case, after about a year, I had moved to an apartment with my mother, and it was closer to where Jay lived than my last house. He started to invite me over to his house. Once I had began online schooling due to the public school in my area being pretty bad, I did enjoy the first couple of visits. We had just talked and went to the park a few blocks from his house and walked around. It was relatively normal. It was when we started to text more rather than talk in person that he started to ask me about doing sexual favors for him. Jay would also constantly talk about how he thought it was hot that I was a guy and a girl, and he would talk about parts of my body that made me very dysphoric in such a sexual way that it made me nauseous in an anxiety-induced way. He would compare me to hentai characters and often talked about the different sexual activities he wanted to do with me, despite telling him I didn't like the way any of it sounded. I had told him several times in the text that I was uncomfortable, that I was scared and repulsed by sexual intimacy, and that I did not like talking about it. He would get upset about it after I told him this and guilt-tripped me into it by putting himself down and eventually just half-assed some sexual commentary back to him. I get him to shut up. It seemed to work for a while until I eventually went to visit him again. The state of this boy's room was really fucking gross, and definitely not the thing that would put someone in the mood to do anything sexual. His closet was piled with dirty clothes on top of clean clothes. His floor was covered in fucking trash, and it smelled like straight up dog shit in the house. And it was just a little fucking odd to me that he could be so sexually explicit. We would cuddle often when I came over because I did enjoy platonic closeness, but he would eventually start moving way too close up against me. Eventually he did inform me that it was an erection, and he wanted me to touch him. I was really uninterested, and I tried to talk my way out of it, even using the old "I'm tired" excuse to try and get out of the situation. He just kept complaining that he can't control it, and he needed to do something to get rid of it, and I eventually gave in and did it because I wanted him to shut the fuck up about it. I did eventually get out of this relationship, and during the last few months, I was in another relationship with someone who made and makes me feel much more safe, but admittedly, this was not fair to either of them. I just did not want to face Jay's angry outburst at me when I tried to break it off, and I was genuinely fucking scared of him. So, like, when I was in college, there was this really creepy Neckbeard, and he was into Pokemon Go. Like, ew, that is so lame. Anyway, this guy smelled really bad, and, like, he would stare at me, and it, like, made me feel really uncomfortable. Like, he was your typical fedora, trench coat, wearing long, scraggly beard type Neckbeard. You know, like the ones from all the memes. Like, one day I was just chilling with my girls, and like, we were smoking pot just off campus before school, like always, when Neckbeard came up to me and said I was pretty, and introduced himself as David. I cut him off right there, and I was like, no one cares who the fuck you are. Don't talk to me or my friends. I really wish that that was the end of it, but as time went on, David sent me a friend request on Facebook. I blocked him, but he created like several other accounts and kept sending friend requests. I have my privacy settings up to the max because I have a lot of losers that are always trying to talk to me and they want to go out with me. I got really sick of his shit and I confronted him about it, and he just kept staring at me like I was a fucking hamburger ready to be devoured. It was so fucking nasty. I felt so gross even talking to this guy. And he, like, started crying, and my homeboy Cletus, like, punched him in his nose, and it was so hot. And I'm so glad that Cletus did that. Like, 2 weeks later, the disgusting neckbeard David was arrested for sexually assaulting 2 girls. Like, I'm so glad that Cletus was there to save me and my friends from this disgusting pig. I will never forget the stink he put off. He was such an ugly motherfucker. I am a very shy person, so bear with me. Now for the introduction. Let's call him Headphone Beard, since he often left his headphones in class. Now this story takes place freshman year. This dude was the typical neckbeard. He would always wear black, had skull shoes, and really loved gore and violence. He was the type to claim that he could beat up anyone, and he wants to be a professional boxer. His greasy black hair constantly placed over his eyes. My first interaction with him was when we were waiting for the bell to ring to go to our class. I often stayed at the end of the line since I sat in the back of the class. He came up to me, put his hand on my shoulder and asked, "Are you Australian?" I replied, "No," and I thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. We met again in history class. He was sitting all alone and I felt sorry for him, so I decided to sit next to him. Big mistake. I sat next to him and he was on his phone. I paid him no attention and continued to do my work. That is when he started complaining about the teacher to me. I'm not going to lie, the teacher was a fucking bitch. And he kinda just made that something that we both agreed on, but he was open about it and would say, "Damn, I can't wait till this bitch leaves. She's so fucking annoying, right?" I completely agreed with him. It continues on like this until one day in algebra he came up to me and he said, "Hey, do you know you look like my girlfriend?" This was very unexpected and creepy. I did not know what to do, so I said, "Really?" And he replied, "Yeah, I have a picture of her. Do you want to see?" I was quite curious to see, so I took a peek. He pulled up Snapchat, and he showed me a gorgeous brunette lady that looked nothing like my baby face ass. The oddest thing is that she had other pictures, but he only showed me the ones where she wore glasses. Now that I look back at this, I'm pretty sure that he did not have a girlfriend. This goes on, and I begin to get very uncomfortable with him, and one day, I have enough of this dude. He would wait for me in the hall, unexpectedly hug me, and I was too anxious to say anything and set boundaries. It wasn't until my boyfriend, whom I have been with for years, now helped me make the decision to set my boundaries. He came up to me, and this is exactly what I said. "Look, you make me extremely uncomfortable. I'm sorry, but leave me the fuck alone." And I thought that was that. His little pride was hurt, for sure. It wasn't until after lunch when it really started. I felt so bad for telling him off for some reason, probably because I was manipulated. But anyway, he was very distant and did not want to go anywhere near me except for the one time he slammed a note on my desk, and when I say slam. He put his hand on like he was smashing a bug, crying. At this point, I opened up the letter, and oh ho ho ho, the rage I felt when I read it. The note said, "Stop telling people that I sexually harassed you." I never fucking said such a thing, and I never started a rumor like that, and as someone who went through that, I was furious and threw the note away and walked over to him, and he was all soaking, and I said to him, "What the fuck?" And he treated the situation how a toddler would. "Fuck off. I try, no one likes me, everyone hates me, I have no need for emotions, they're pointless." I just said fuck it, and I didn't bother with him, and went on with my own life, and gave him the boot out. Let's call this one guy Neckbeard. He had a thing for two young female characters from a French animated series. I'm going to hold off from naming the two main characters by their actual names to protect the Neckbeard. So, I'll call them by something slightly different. The two characters in question are Amy and Eve. He'd written a fanfic that he wanted me to edit, but first he wanted me to truly get the essence of what Amy was like, so that I knew what kind of characterizations he was aiming for. I'd never heard of this animation until this point, so I said I'd look it up and get a sense of her from any media that I could find. When left to my own devices, I can get a handle on unfamiliar characters in around half an hour, but don't charge for the extra time I spend doing this research. He told me that this wouldn't be good enough, and it was imperative that I watch the series in the original French. I barely speak French, and don't have the fluency in it to really get the tone of voice, not even with subtitled works. So I voiced my doubts about this, but he was adamant. He had a link to a folder of videos of the entire first series and wanted me to watch the whole damn thing to make sure I understood Amy's personality. I wonder how long the runtime for that much content is, so I looked it up. 9.5 hours, so I told Neckbeard that if he wanted me to watch all of it that I would have to charge, and I would do so at my base rate of £15 per hour. That would have cost him £142. He balked at that and said that actually Amy only had major parts in 2 or 3 episodes, so I only needed to watch those. I still charged him, but he was happy to pay the required amount, and I tried to watch them. The videos he linked to me didn't play for some reason, so after a bit of fruitless tinkering, I gave up and found the equivalent episode elsewhere in English. By the time I'd watched all 3 episodes, I thought I had a good handle on Amy and prepared myself for a game of spot the differences between her canon representation and the version he would show me. Fanfic Amy was a brat. I understood that canon Amy would be quite childlike, but I hadn't gotten an impression of her as bratty. Neckbeard's depiction wasn't an accurate representation of brattiness either, especially not the way Amy would be likely to do it. In the story, she was upset from being forbidden from attending some kind of royal state visit by her father and had been left behind at home. She was bored, and in the story, she was also tired. None of that's going to bring out the best in anyone, but if someone was upset at feeling rejected, bored, and tired, then I'd expect them to go through a cycle. I think if you're going to present a character going through this cycle, then you should endeavor to make sure that your readers feel the character's regret and frustration at themselves just as much as their irritation. Otherwise, it's unrealistic. Fanfic Amy did not go around the whole cycle. Although she snapped at people, huffed, rolled her eyes multiple times, she was irritable and easily frustrated by the events of the story, but never tried to curtail herself or repair the relationships or reputation she was damaging. In fact, she was portrayed as feeling entitled to treat everyone that way. It turned out that the story was a kink fic, and in it Amy would upset the wrong person by being bratty and then get her comeuppance. It was your standard humble the haughty fic. As such, it relied on misrepresenting both Amy and the tired, upset, irritable dynamic to work. If either she or the irritability cycle had been presented properly, then Amy's feelings and actions would have looked relatable. The reader would have been likely to sympathize, and that would destroy the setup for the kink that Neckbeard was going for. I specifically market myself as someone who helps people write good quality characterizations, so at this point I had a dilemma. Did Neckbeard want me to do what I market myself as doing, which would break his story, or pretend that his characterizations was just fine and watch him churn out poor quality work, and then possibly recommend me to other people who also like to write this kind of content? I decided that I did not want more work like this, and I'd rather put my effort into finding customers who genuinely wanted good characterizations, so I decided to be honest with Neckbeard on the slim hope that he'd still find value in it. He was not very happy about it. Amy was also an elderly character in the story, someone who didn't fit the description of a scantily clad, pretty young woman, but who featured enough in the story that the quality of her characterization would impact on its overall quality. I recommended to Neckbeard that we look at her characterization too. He told me that not everything needed to be fucking analyzed. I'm not going to say I thought that he only considered the young, sexy character worthy of a proper analysis, and that he was prepared to ignore the old crone for being, well, old and cronish and unsexy. But I'm not going to say I didn't think that either. One more detail worth sharing here is about Neckbeard's idea of Amy's cultural background. Anyone familiar with the animation I'm talking about will know that Amy is a forest princess who lives in a tree. To me, that means she would be comfortable with bugs. During a part of this story, Amy freaks out over a bug in her house. I really did not think it reflected the fine-tuning of Amy's characterization he'd insisted on back when he wanted me to watch the animation in its original French to get every scrape of Amy's nuance. But he didn't seem to want to think about that now that we were about to launch into the kinky bit of the story. I pointed the bug issue out to Neckbeard as an obvious issue. He didn't like that either and decided to keep it in. I stood my ground and he reluctantly adjusted the story. He had 2 sessions with me and then disappeared, never to book anything with me again. I have no idea what the fuck I just read. If you are new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.